The blood is still warm on the marble. Livia Marcella is 26 years old and she can feel it soaking through the silk of her stola where she kneels beside her husband's body. Can smell the copper iron stench mixing with the perfume she had applied that morning for a dinner that will never happen. Can hear through the walls of the Imperial bedchamber the sound of hobnailed boots, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, moving through the palace corridors with a purpose that makes her stomach clench with understanding. She was, until 17 minutes ago, Augusta Empress of Rome, wife of Gaius Aurelius Maximus, the most powerful woman in the known world. She commanded a household of 3,000. She received ambassadors from Partha and petitions from senators. She wore purple that only the imperial family was permitted to wear, ate from gold plates, slept on silks imported from the far edges of the trade routes. Now she kneels in her husband's blood, while the men who killed him secure the palace, and she understands with terrible clarity that the purple she wears has become a target, rather than a prop. Action. The door to the bedchamber opens. A man enters tall, perhaps 45, wearing the distinctive armor of the Praetorian Guard, but with the red cloak that marks him as prefect. His face is familiar. She has seen it at state functions, at the morning salutations where her husband received his officers, at the dinners where military matters were discussed over wine and roasted peacock. His name is Lucius Cassius Nerva, and until 17 minutes ago, he was sworn to protect her husband's life with his own. Now he looks at her with an expression she cannot read. Not triumph, not cruelty, but something colder. Assessment. The calculation of a man determining what to do with a piece of the old regime that has suddenly become his to dispose of. Augusta, he says. The title sounds strange in his mouth, as if he is testing whether it still applies. My condolences on your husband's sudden illness. Illness. She looks at the body beside her, the stab wounds in the chest and abdomen, the defensive cuts on her husband's hands where he had tried to ward off the blades, the blood that has pulled across half the floor. Is that what we're calling it? That is what the Senate will be told. The Emperor succumbed to a fever that struck suddenly and proved resistant to the physician's efforts. His death was peaceful. He named Titus Flavius Sais as his successor with his final breath. My husband hated Sais. He was planning to have him prosecuted for treason, which is why it was necessary to act before those plans matured. Nerva steps closer, his boots leaving prints in the blood. Sais is 3 days' march from Rome with the Pannonian legions. He will arrive to find the city peaceful, the succession orderly, the transfer of power complete. He will be grateful to those who arranged this transition. And me? She forces her voice to remain steady. What is your plan for the Emperor's widow? Nerva smiles. It is not a pleasant expression. That depends on several factors. How cooperative you are, how valuable you prove to be, how much trouble you cause during the interregnum. The interregnum. The period between your husband's death and Caesar's assumption of power. 72 hours, perhaps slightly more, depending on the speed of his march. During that time, the Praetorian Guard controls Rome. We control the palace. We control everything that happens within these walls. The implication settles into her chest like a company. LD wait. 72 hours. 3 days during which the man who murdered her husband will have unlimited access to the imperial household, to the women who live within it, to her. What do you want? She asks. At the moment, information. The Emperor kept records lists of those he suspected, evidence he had gathered, plans he had made. These records would be inconvenient if they fell into the wrong hands. I need to know where they are, and if I tell you, then you demonstrate cooperation. Cooperation is rewarded, and if I don't, Nerva's expression does not change, but something shifts in his eyes. Then you demonstrate the opposite, and the Guard has traditional methods for dealing with the households of fallen emperors, methods that your predecessors' wives experienced, methods that I am certain you would prefer to avoid. He lets the threat hang in the air, lets her imagination supply the details that his words do not specify. I need time to think, she says. You have until midnight after that. I will assume you have chosen non-cooperation, and I will proceed accordingly. He turns toward the door, then pauses. One more thing. Your stepdaughter is being brought to the guard's quarters for Kay, Steining, and the 3 women of your husband's private household. I thought you should know that their treatment will depend on the same factors that determine yours: cooperation or its absence. He leaves. She hears the door lock behind him, hears the guards taking up position in the corridor, hears the sounds of the palace being systematically secured by men whose loyalty has shifted to a new Ma. She has until midnight, perhaps 8 hours. 8 hours to find a way to survive what is coming. What you are about to learn has been deliberately excluded from the histories that record Rome's imperial successions. The historians who documented the deaths of emperors focused on political factors: who gained power, who lost it, which factions rose, and which fell. They recorded the fates of male relatives with precision: executed, exiled, permitted to live in obscurity. They noted the disposition of property, the redistribution of titles, the realignment of the senatorial class. But the fates of imperial women during the interregnum, the gap between one emperor's death and another's assumption of power, were rarely specified. A widow might be mentioned as having retired from public life, or interred private existence, without detail about what that transition actually involved. The women of the imperial household simply disappeared from the record. Their experiences during the dangerous hours after their protector's death left to imagination. Tonight you will learn what actually happened during those hours. You will learn about the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the Emperor, and what they did when their oaths became void. You will learn about the interregnum tradition, the understanding never written but universally acknowledged that the Guard had certain privileges during the transition period. You will learn about Livia Marcella, whose husband's assassination left her at the mercy of the men who killed him. You will learn what Prefect Nerva demanded, what she was willing to sacrifice to survive, and what happened to the other women of the imperial household during the 72 hours before the new emperor arrived. Subscribe if you want to understand what really happened behind palace walls during Rome's most dangerous transitions. Comment below telling me where you are watching from, because the next 8 hours of Livia's life will determine whether she survives. And I am going to tell you exactly what she faced and what she did. But before I describe the choices she made and the horrors she witnessed, I need to take you back. I need to explain why the Praetorian Guard held the power they did, how the interregnum tradition emerged, and what it meant to be an imperial woman after the emperor died. Because you cannot understand what Livia faced without understanding the system that made her vulnerability inevitable. The Praetorian Guard was Rome's most powerful military force and also its most dangerous. Originally established by Augustus as the emperor's personal bodyguard, the Guard had evolved over generations into something far more complex than a simple protective force. 9 cohorts of the finest soldiers in the empire, stationed in Rome itself, while other legions were posted to distant frontiers. The Taurians were simultaneously the emperor's greatest protection and his greatest threat. They protected him from assassination, and they also carried it out when circumstances warranted. They ensured the stability of his reign, and they destabilized it when a new patron offered better rewards. They swore oaths of absolute loyalty, and they broke those oaths whenever breaking them proved more profitable than keeping them. By the time of Livia's husband's reign, the Praetorian Guard had killed more emperors than any foreign enemy: Caligula, Galba, Pertinax, Elgabalus. The list of emperors who had died at their sworn protector's hands was long and instructive. Every emperor knew that the men guarding his bedchamber might become his executioner if the political winds shifted. But the Guard's power extended beyond assassination. During the interregnum, the period between an emperor's death and his successor's secure assumption of power, the Taurians controlled Rome, absolutely. No other military force was permitted within the city's sacred boundary. The Senate had no soldiers to enforce its decrees. The urban cohorts, Rome's police force, were subordinate to the Taurian prefect. For those critical hours or days, the Guard was Rome's only effective authority. This created a tradition that the historians rarely discuss directly. During the interregnum, the Guard expected certain considerations. the imperial treasury would provide a substantial donative, a payment for the soldiers' support of the succession. The new emperor would confirm the prefect's position or negotiate his honorable retirement. And the palace itself, with all its contents, was understood to be available for the guard's immediate enjoyment. The contents included people. Imperial women during the interregnum were in a position that Roman law did not adequately address. They were no longer protected by an emperor's power. He was dead. They were not yet protected by his successor. He had not arrived. Their status as imperial family members made them valuable as hostages, as bargaining chips, as symbols of the transition. But that same status made them targets for soldiers who resented the aristocrats they had served, who wanted to demonstrate that the old regime's privilege had ended, who simply wanted what had been forbidden to them. The tradition was never written down. It did not need to be. Every woman in the imperial household understood what an emperor's death meant for her. Every guard member understood what opportunities the interregnum provided. The system was maintained through shared knowledge, transmitted across generations, reinforced through each succession crisis. This was the system that now held Livia Marcella in its grip. His was the tradition that Prefect Nerva intended to enforce. This was the framework within which she had 8 hours to find a way to survive. Now let us return to the imperial bedchamber, where Livia is beginning to calculate her options. She could not stay where she was. The blood was cooling, the body stiffening, and remaining beside her murdered husband accomplished nothing except demonstrating a grief that Nerva would interpret as weakness. She needed to move, to think, to find leverage that might protect her during the hours ahead. She rose, her stola heavy with blood that had soaked through the fabric. Her hands were stained, her knees ached from kneeling on the hard marble. She felt as if she were moving through water, every action requiring effort that her shocked mind could barely sup. The chamber had 2 exits. The main door, where guards were now posted, led to the public corridors of the palace. A smaller door, concealed behind a tapestry, led to the private passage that connected the imperial apartments, a passage her husband had used for discreet movement, for accessing his private study without being observed. The guards might not know about the passage. It was one of the palace's many secrets shared only with trusted household members. If she could reach it, she might be able to move through the palace unseen, might be able to reach the records Nerva wanted before he did. Information was power. Her husband had taught her that. He had shared more with her than emperors typically shared with their wives, had valued her intelligence, had consulted her on matters that other women were excluded from. She knew where the records were kept. She knew what they contained. She knew which secrets would be most dangerous in the wrong hands. She moved to the concealed door, lifted the tapestry, found the latch that her husband had shown her years ago. The door opened silently. It had been designed for discretion, and beyond it lay a narrow corridor lit by oil lamps that servants maintained around the clock. She stepped through, pulled the door closed behind her, and began to move. The passage wound through the palace's hidden architecture, the service corridors, and connecting tunnels that allowed the imperial household to function without the masters seeing the mechanisms that served them. She passed storage rooms and slave quarters, heard voices behind wall that she could not identify, smelled cooking from kitchens that continued their work despite the assassination happening floors above. The household did not know yet, or perhaps they knew and were pretending not to, continuing their routines because routine was safe, because acknowledging the change meant confronting what it meant for them. She reached her husband's private study after perhaps 10 minutes of careful navigation. The room was small, windowless, accessible only through the hidden passages designed for exactly the kind of secrets that Nerva was now hunting. The records were stored in a cabinet of cedarwood, locked with a mechanism that required knowledge her husband had shared with her alone. She opened it, revealing scrolls and tablets arranged in careful order, each marked with codes that identified its contents. She scanned the labels, her mind racing through possibilities. Evidence against Sais. Yes, that was here. But Sais was arriving in 3 days and would destroy it himself. Evidence against senators who had opposed her husband. Useful perhaps, but not immediately valuable for her survival. Evidence against the Praetorian Guard. She stopped. Her fingers had found a scroll marked with a code she recognized. It contained her husband's documentation of irregularities in the guard's finances, evidence that Prefect Nerva had been skimming from the donatives, redirecting funds that should have gone to common soldiers into his own accounts. This was leverage. The common soldiers of the guard were loyal to their own interests, not to their prefect. If they learn that Nerva had been stealing from them, his position would collapse. He would be torn apart by his own men. She took the scroll. She also took two others' evidence of Nerva's communications with Sais before the assassination, proving that the prefect had planned the murder, rather than responding to circumstances. Proof of conspiracy could be as valuable as proof of theft, depending on who receive it. She had weapons now. Not physical weapons. Those were useless against armed soldiers. But information weapons. Leverage that might let her negotiate survival. The question was how to use them. She heard footsteps in the passage outside the study, multiple feet moving with the purposeful cadence of soldiers who knew where they were going. They knew about the passages. Of course they did. They had been guarding the palace for years, had learned its secrets through patient observation and bribed servants. Her advantage had been brief. She looked around the study for another exit. There was one, a narrow shaft that connected to the drainage system designed as an emergency escape route for an emperor who feared assassination. It was small, dark, and led to an uncertain destination, but it w as better than confronting the soldiers now approaching. She took the scrolls, tucked them into her stola, and climbed into the shaft. The descent was terrifying. The shaft was vertical for the first several feet, then angled sharply as it connected to the drainage tunnels. She scraped her hands and knees on rough stone, tore her clothing on protrusions she could not see, fought the panic that came from descending into absolute darkness toward unknown dangers. When she finally emerged, she was in a tunnel that smelled of sewage and stagnant water. Dim light filtered from somewhere ahead, grates that opened to the surface perhaps, or oil lamps maintained by the slaves who serviced the system. She was beneath the palace in the infrastructure that Rome's elite pretended did not exist. She was alive, free for the moment, carrying information that might save her. But she was also alone, filthy, trapped in tunnels she did not know, while above her, the Praetorian Guard controlled everything she had ever relied upon. She began to move toward the light. The tunnels led her to an unexpected destination. After perhaps an hour of careful navigation, following the flow of water, choosing passages Hat seemed to lead upward, avoiding the sounds of movement that occasionally echoed through the system. She emerged through a grate into a courtyard. She recognized the Temple of Vesta, the sacred precinct where Rome's eternal flame was tended by virgin priestesses who answered to no one except the Pontifex Maximus. And the Pontifex Maximus was dead. Her husband had held that title along his imperial powers. The Vestals were for the moment without formal authority over them, but they were also protected by religious law so ancient and so absolute that even the Praetorian Guard would hesitate to violate it. The vessels were sacrosanct. Anyone who harmed them faced execution by methods so severe that Rome's hardened soldiers feared them. The precinct itself was asylum anyone who reached it could claim sanctuary that tradition required the priests to honor. Livia pulled herself through the grate and collapsed on the paving stones of the courtyard. She was exhausted, filthy, her clothing ruined, and her hands bleeding from the crawl through the tunnels. But she was in sanctuary. She was for the moment safe. A figure appeared in the doorway of the temple, a woman in white robe, perhaps 50 years old, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in religious service. The Virgo Maxima, the chief of the Vestals, whose authority within this precinct was absolute. Augusta, the woman's voice was calm, unsurprised, as if blood-soaked empresses regularly emerged from her drainage system. We had heard of your husband's illness. I see the reports were incomplete. The reports were lies. He was murdered by the Praetorian Guard. Prefect Nerva is hunting for me. I claim sanctuary. The Virgo Maxima studied her for a long moment. Sanctuary is traditionally granted, but traditionally those who claim it are not carrying documents that could determine the imperial succession. Livia's hand went involuntarily to the scrolls hidden in her stola. How did you know? You came through the tunnels, rather than the gates. You are carrying something you could not bring openly. And you are intelligent enough to understand that your survival depends on having something valuable to trade. She gestured toward the temple entrance. Come inside, we should discuss your situation where we cannot be observed. The interior of the Temple of Vesta was unlike any other space in Rome. The sacred flame burned at the center, tended by priestesses whose entire existence was dedicated to maintaining its continuity. The walls were lined with sacred objects, relics from Rome's founding, items whose religious significance made them untouchable by secular authority, and there were chambers beyond the public areas, private spaces where the Vests lived and worked, and kept secrets that even emperor could not access. The Virgo Maxima led Livia to one of these chambers, a small room furnished with simple elegance. She gestured for Livia to sit, then took a seat across from her. I am Claudia Quinta, the Virgo Maximus said. I have held this position for 23 years. In that time, I have seen 4 emperors die and 4 successions accomplished. I know what happens during the interregnum. I know what you are facing. Then you know I need help. I know you need leverage. Help is more complicated. Claudia's eyes were sharp, assessing. What do you have? Livia removed the scrolls from her stola and placed them on the table between them. Evidence that Prefect Nerva has been stealing from the guard's treasury. Evidence that he conspired with Sais to assassinate my husband before my husband could pee. Rose-cute sighs for treason. Claudia examined the scrolls without touching them. The financial evidence could destroy Nerva. The guard would kill him themselves if they knew he had been stealing their donatives. The conspiracy evidence is less immediately useful. Sais will arrive as emperor regardless, and he will hardly prosecute his ally for helping him gain the throne. But the financial evidence alone might be enough. Enough for what exactly? Claudia leaned forward. Let us be precise about your goals, Augusta. What do you want to achieve in the next 72 hours? Livia had been thinking about this question since she emerged from the tunnels. Her immediate survival was essential, but survival meant different things depending on how the succession unfolded. I want to live, she said. Not just sue. Survive the interregnum, but live afterward with some measure of security and independence. I do not want to become Sais's hostage, his trophy, his demonstration of dominance over my husband's legacy. That is ambitious. Sais will want to display his control over the previous regime. A former empress living independently undermines that display, which is why I need leverage that extends beyond the interregnum. Something that will make Sais prefer my independence to my subjugation. Claudia nodded slowly. You are thinking clearly. That is good. Many women in your position would be paralyzed by grief and fear, but clear thinking requires accurate information. Let me tell you what I know about your situation. She rose and moved to a cabinet at the room's edge, removing a scroll that she brought back to the table. The Praetorian Guard has approximately 9,000 men in Rome. Perhaps 2/3 of them are loyal to Nerva, personally soldiers who have benefited from his patronage, who owe their positions to his favor. The remaining third are loyal to the Guard's traditions and their own interests, which may not align with Nerva's plans. So, the evidence of his theft could split the Guard. It could, but releasing that evidence carelessly would create chaos that might benefit no one. The Guard might fragment into factions. Rome might see street fighting that kills civilians, and you might be caught in the middle with neither faction having reason to protect you. Then how do I use the evidence? Carefully, strategically. You need to find the right recipient, someone within the Guard who opposes Nerva, who has the credibility to use the evidence effectively, who would see your survival as beneficial to their own interests. Do you know such a person? Claudia smiled slightly. The Vestals know many things, Augusta. We have tended the sacred flame for 7 centuries. We have witnessed every crisis Rome has faced. We have learned that survival requires relationships with people at every level of power. She returned to her cabinet and removed another scroll. Tribune Marcus Aurelius Cato. He commands the 2nd cohort. His family is old patrician. They have resented Nerva's rise because he is of lower birth. He is known to be disciplined, honest, and intensely loyal to the Guard's traditions, rather than to any individual commander. If the evidence of nervous theft reached him, he would act on it. How do I reach him? That is the difficult part. Ko is in the camp behind walls controlled by Nerva's loyalists. Getting a message to him would require either leaving this sanctuary, which would expose you to Nerva's search, or finding a messenger who could penetrate the camp without raising suspicion. Livia thought about this. The Vests have servants, slaves who move through the city to purchase supplies, to deliver messages to other temples, to conduct the business that keeps this precinct functioning. We do, but our servants are known. Nerva will be watching for any communication from this sanctuary. Then the messenger cannot appear to come from here. They must appear to be doing something else entirely with the message hidden in their ordinary business. Claudia studied her with renewed interest. You have thought about clandestine communication before. I was empress. My husband had enemies. I learned to think about many things that well-bred women are not supposed to understand. Good. Then you will understand why I am about to make a proposal that may seem mercenary. But that reflects the realities of our situation. What proposal? The Vests will help you. We will provide a messenger, a route to Tribune Ko, protection within this sanctuary for as long as needed, but we require something in return. What? The Temple of Vesta holds significant properties and treasuries. My husband controlled the disposition of certain religious funds as Pontifex Maximus. When size arrives, he will assume that authority along with the rest of imperial power. I want a guarant. Documented, witnessed, legally binding that the new emperor will not interfere with the Vestal's independent management of our resources. It was a business transaction. Claudia was offering survival in exchange for future political protection. It was cold, calculating, exactly the kind of arrangement that Livia understood from years of navigating court politics. I cannot guarantee what size will. Eldo, she said, I have no power over the new emperor. But you have the conspiracy evidence, the scrolls proving that Nerva and Size planned the assassination together. If that evidence became public, it would undermine Size's legitimacy. He would have to spend years fighting accusations that he murdered his way to power. You want me to use the conspiracy evidence as leverage against Size after he arrives? I want you to keep that evidence as insurance. The financial evidence destroys Nerva. The conspiracy evidence threatens Size. With both in your possession, you have leverage against both the current threat and the future regime. Livia absorbed this. The Virgo Maxima was proposing a complex strategy. Use one piece of evidence now to survive the interregnum. Hold the other piece for future. Bargaining power. It was sophisticated, ruthless, exactly the kind of thinking that had kept the Vestals independent for 7 centuries. If I agree, Livia said, how do we proceed? First, we clean you up. You cannot negotiate effectively while covered in blood and sewer filth. Then we draft the documents that formalize our arrangement. Then we send the messenger to Tribune Ko, and then we wait to see whether our strategy succeeds or whether we need to improvise. The next 3 hours were spent on preparation. Livia bathed in the vessel's private facilities, scrubbing away the blood and filth that marked her escape from the palace. She was given clean clothing, not the purple of an empress which would mark her as a target, but the simple white of a religious supplicant that would help her blend into the temple's population. While she bathed, Claudia's scribes prepared the documents. The arrangement was formalized in language that lawyers would spend generations arguing about: promises of advocacy, guarantees of effort, the carefully hedged commitments that powerful people made when they wanted to create obligations without specifying exactly what those obligations required. Whenever everything was prepared, Claudia summoned the messenger. He was a young man, perhaps 20, with the bearing of someone born to slavery but educated beyond his station. His name was Tersus, and he had been serving the Vestals since childhood. More importantly, he had connections throughout the city, family members who worked in various households, friends from the slave quarters of different estates. A network of relationships that let him move through Rome's hidden social infrastructure. You understand what we need, Claudia said to him. A message to Tribune Ko delivered without anyone knowing it came from here. The message must reach him personally. not through intermediaries who might report to Nerva, and you have a way to accomplish this. My cousin serves in the guards' camp kitchens. She has access to the officers' mess. If I can reach her, she can put the message where Ko will find it during his evening meal. Can you reach her without being observed? The camp suppliers enter through the service gates. I have worked those gates before when the temple needed provisions that required camp sources. I am known to the guards there, not as a vestal servant, but as a general provisioner. I see, and enter legitimately. Livia listened to this exchange with growing hope. The plan was plausible. The messenger was capable. The network he described was exactly the kind of hidden infrastructure that made Rome's rigid social hierarchy actually function. The message, she said. What exactly should it say? Claudia looked at her. That is for you to decide, Augusta. You understand the evidence. You understand what Ko needs to know. Write the message that will persuade him to act. They brought her writing materials, papyrus, ink, a stylus that felt strange in her hand after the golden implements she had used as empress. She thought for a moment about what to say, how to compress the evidence and the appeal into words that would reach Ko's sense of honor and self-interest simultaneously. Then, she began to write. Tribune Marcus Aurelius Ko, you do not know me, but I know you by reputation. You are said to be a man of honor, loyal to the guard's traditions, rather than to any individual commander. I am writing to you because the guard's traditions are being betrayed by the man who currently commands it. Prefect Lucius Cassius Nerva has been stealing from the donative treasury for at least 3 years. He has diverted funds meant for common soldiers into his personal accounts. He has used guard resources to enrich himself while his men receive less than their due. I have documentary evidence of these thefts. Account records, transfer documents, testimony from treasury officials who were forced to cooperate with his schemes. This evidence is currently in safekeeping, available to anyone with the authority to investigate. I am Livia Marcella, widow of Emperor Gas Aurelius Maximus. I am currently in sanctuary, hiding from Nerva's search because I possess this evidence and others that threaten his position. I am offering you the opportunity to be the instrument of justice to expose Nerva's crimes to the guard and to remove a commander who has betrayed the men under his authority. In exchange, I ask only that you guarantee my safety during the interregnum. Not power, not wealth, not position. Only life and the freedom to live it. If you wish to pursue this matter, send a reply through the messenger who delivered this letter. Time is short. Nerva is searching for me, and when he finds me, the evidence will be destroyed along with any hope of justice. I am trusting you with my Ife, Tribune. I hope that trust is not misplaced. Livia Marcella Augusta. She finished the letter and handed it to Turs, who read it quickly, nodded, and concealed it in his clothing. I will leave immediately, he said. If everything goes well, I should be back before midnight with Ko's response, and if everything does not go well, Teresa's met her eyes directly. Then I will not come back at all. Nay, Arvia's men are everywhere. If I am caught, I will be questioned. I will try to resist, but everyone breaks eventually. You should be prepared for the possibility that your hiding place becomes known. He left. Livia watched him go, aware that she had placed her survival in the hands of a slave she had met 30 minutes ago, that the entire plan depended on connections and loyalties she could not verify, that she might have just condemned herself by trusting people she did not know. Now we wait, Claudia said. I suggest you rest. Whatever happens next, you will need your strength. She could not rest. The small chamber the vessels provided was comfortable, but comfort meant nothing when her mind would not stop cycling through possibilities. She thought about her husband, about the 17 years of marriage that had ended in blood on a marble floor. She thought about her stepdaughter Aurelia, 19 years old, who was now in the guard's custody being questioned. She thought about the 3 women of the private household, her husband's concubines, women she had resented during his life, but who were now fellow victims of the same catastrophe. She thought about what the interregnum tradition meant for them, what the guard did to imperial women when emperors died. She had heard stories. Everyone in Rome had heard stories, though they were told in whispers and denied in public. After Caligula's assassination, his wife Sionia had been killed by the same soldiers who murdered him, but not immediately. After Nero's suicide, the women of his household had been distributed among the officers as rewards for supporting the succession. After Domitian's murder, his concubines had faced treatment that even the court historians refused to describe explicitly. The pattern was consistent. Imperial women during the interregnum were prizes, spoils, demonstrations of the transfer of power from old regime to new. The new emperor would eventually restore order, would punish excesses that threatened stability, would reassert the controls that maintained civilization. But during those critical hours between one reign and the next, the controls were suspended. And what happened to women within palace walls was whatever the men who controlled those walls decided should happen. She thought about Aurelia, about the 3 concubines, about what might be happening to them while she hid in Sanctuary A. ND waited for a messenger who might never return. She thought about whether survival was worth it if she survived alone, if the other women were destroyed, while she bargained for her own safety. She thought about the limits of what she could accept. A knock on the chamber door interrupted her thoughts. Claudia entered, her expression grave. "News from the palace," she said. "One of our servants returned with reports." "What news?" "Nerva has discovered that you are not in the palace. He has expanded the search to the entire city. He has also announced that he will begin processing the other women of the imperial household, unless you surrender yourself by dawn." Processing his word, not mine. The servant did not specify what it means, but the implications are clear. Livia felt her stomach clench. Dawn was perhaps 6 hours away. If Turs succeeded and KO responded, there might be time to change the situation before the deadline. If the plan failed, she would have to choose between her own survival and the fates of women who were suffering because of her escape. "There is more," Claudia continued. "The servant reports that your stepdaughter Aurelia has been particularly selected. Nerv A has taken personal interest in her questioning. She is in his quarters. Aurelia, 19 years old. Beautiful in the way that imperial daughters were always beautiful, with the best cosmetics, the finest clothing, the careful cultivation that prepared them for strategic marriages. She had been betrothed to a senator's son, a match that would have allied important families. Now she was in Nerva's court, facing whatever questioning meant from a man who had just murdered her father. "I have to do something," Livia said. "You are doing something. You have sent a message that might change everything. Acting rashly now would throw away the work you have already done. And if the message fails, if Tursus is caught, if KO refuses, if Nerva is still in control at dawn, what happens to Aurelia then?" CL. Audia was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "I will tell you something that the Vests have learned over 7 centuries of observing Rome's crisis. Sometimes there is nothing you can do. Sometimes the forces array against you are too powerful, too entrenched, too ruthless. Sometimes survival requires accepting that others will be destroyed while you live. That is monstrous. That is reality. The question is not whether you can save everyone you cannot. The question is whether you can save anyone, including yourself. If you surrender to Nerva, you will not save Aurelia. You will simply join her in whatever he is planning. 2 victims instead of 1. Is that better?" Livia knew the logic was sound. She knew that surrendering would accomplish nothing except adding hers LF to the list of casualties. She knew that the rational response was to wait, to hope, to accept that her stepdaughter's fate was beyond her control. But she also knew that she could not simply wait while Aurelia suffered, could not hide in Sanctuary while the clock ticked toward dawn and the processing that Nerva had promised. "Is there any way to reach Aurelia?" she asked. "Any way to communicate with her, to let her know that help might be coming. The palace is locked down. No one enters or leaves without Nerva's permission. But servants still move within it. The household still functions. Food is prepared. Chambers are cleaned. The mechanisms of daily life continue." Claudia studied her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Nerva has thousands of soldiers, but he still relies on SL. Aves to cook his food and clean his quarters. I am thinking that the palace slave network knows things that the Taurians do not, and that some of those slaves might be willing to help if they believed help was possible. You want to contact slaves in the palace? How? Our messenger is already on his mission to the camp. You must have other messengers, other connections. The vessels have been in Rome for 7 centuries. You must have relationships throughout the city's servant population. Claudia considered this. We have connections, yes, but using them to contact the palace directly is extremely risky. If Nerva discovered that we were interfering in his control of the imperial household, even our religious protection might not save us. I am not asking you to act against Nerva directly. I am asking you to send a message to slaves who already hate him, who might be willing to help Aurelia if they knew that help was possible, who might slow the processing even if they cannot stop it entirely. And what would this message say? Livia thought about it. That the evidence against Nerva exists, that Tribune Co. is receiving that evidence, that by dawn everything might change, that anyone who the Imperial women survive until dawn might be rewarded by the new regime. You are asking palace slaves to bet their lives on a plan that might fail. I am giving palace slaves a reason to hope that things might change. Hope is powerful. Hope makes people take risks they would not otherwise take. If even a few slaves in the palace believe that Nerva's fall is possible, they might act in ways. By time, Claudia was silent for a long moment. Then she rose. Wait here. I will see what can be arranged. The next 2 hours were the longest of Livia's life. She waited in the small chamber, listening to the sounds of the temple, the quiet footsteps of Vestals moving through their nocturnal routines, the crackle of the eternal flame that could be heard even from this distance, the occasional voice raised in prayer or conversation, normal sounds, peaceful sounds, utterly disconnected from the terror that was consuming the palace several hundred yards away. She thought about her husband. Their marriage had been political, arranged by families for dynastic purposes, but over 17 years it had become something more. Not love, exactly. Not the passionate attachment that poets celebrated, but partnership, understanding, the comfortable alliance of 2 people who had learned to navigate power together. He had valued her intelligence. He had shared secrets that emperors usually kept from their wives. He had treated her as an equal in private, whatever role she played in public. Now he was dead, murdered by men who had sworn to protect him, and she was hiding in a temple while those same men hunted her. The partnership that had defined her adult life was over. Whatever came next, she would face it alone. She thought about what next might look like if she survived. Sais would be emperor. He had no reason to love her. She was the widow of the man he had conspired to murder. The best she could hope for from him was indifference, permission to retire from public life to some remote ease. Tate, where she would not threaten his legitimacy. The worst. She did not want to think about the worst. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Claudia entered, and behind her was Ters. He was alive, he was back, and the expression on his face suggested that he carried news. "Tell her," Claudia said. Ters stepped forward. He looked exhausted, his clothing dusty from hard travel, but his eyes were bright with something that might have been triumph. Tribune Co. has agreed to act. He is assembling loyal officers for a meeting at the 4th hour. He wants the evidence delivered to that meeting. He agreed just like that. Not just like that. He questioned me extensively. He wanted to know how I could verify that the evidence was genuine, that this was not a trap by Nerva to identify his enemy. I told him that the Vestals were involved, that the Virgo Maxima had guaranteed the authenticity. He knows the Vestals do not lie in matters touching their oaths, and he trusts that. He trusts that the Vests have survived for 7 centuries by never making promises they could not keep. If the Virgo Maximus says the evidence is real, it is real. Livia looked at Claudia. You vouched for me. I vouched for the evidence. Your husband showed me those documents 2 years ago when he was considering how to handle Nerva's corruption. I knew they were genuine because I had seen them before. You knew all this time. You knew about Nerva's theft. The vessels know many things. We choose carefully what to share and when to share it. Tonight, sharing serves our interests. 2 years ago it did not. The pragmatism should have offended Livia. but she was too focused on the immediate situation to feel anything as abstract as offense. Claudia had helped her when help was valuable to the Vestals. That was enough. The meeting at the 4th hour, she said to Ters. That is 3 hours from now. What happens then? Ko will present the evidence to officers he trusts. If they believe it, they will move against Nur. Va. A challenge to his authority. Demand for an investigation, possibly arrest. And if some of those officers are secretly loyal to Nerva, if the meeting is compromised, Ters hesitated. Then KO and everyone who attended will be executed before dawn, and Nerva will know that you were behind the challenge. The search for you will become more intense. So everything depends on whether Ko has judged company. Correctly which officers he can trust. Yes, Livia absorbed this. The plan had always been a gamble, but now the stakes were crystallizing. 3 hours until the meeting, perhaps 4 or 5 hours until the outcome became clear. By dawn, either Nerva would be destroyed, or she would be hunted by a prefect who knew exactly what she had tried to do. The evidence needs to reach that meeting, she said. How do we get it to KO? I can take it, Ters said. The same route I used before, but it would be safer if he stopped. There was a sound from outside the temple, distant but distinct, shouting, the clash of metal on metal, the sounds of fighting. Claudia moved to the chamber's small window, which overlooked an inner courtyard. I cannot see what is happening, but something has changed. More sounds, louder now. Closer. The temple's outer doors being struck. Voices demanding entry. Nerva has found me, Livia said. He has found the temple. He does not yet know you are here. Claudia turned to face her, but he suspects, and he is willing to violate sanctuary to find out. The religious protections mean nothing to a man who has already murdered an emperor. Nerva has gambled everything on this succession. If you escape, if the evidence reaches Ko, his gamble fails. He will not let ancient traditions stop him when his life is at stake. The sounds were growing louder. Livia could hear soldiers moving through the temple, hear the protests of vessels being pushed aside, hear the systematic search of a precinct that was supposed to be inviolable. Is there another way out, she asked. The same tunnels, used to enter. But they will be watching the exits by now. Then I am trapped. Perhaps not. Claudia moved to the cabinet where she had stored the documents earlier. She removed a bundle, clothes, supplies, something that might have been a weapon. There is a route that the vessels have used for emergencies, a passage that leads to the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer. From there you can reach the Orai. From the river you can reach the camp where Ko is, where the meeting will happen in 3 hours. If you can reach it, if you can present the evidence in person, your testimony will have more weight than any document. You want me to go to the Praetorian camp, the headquarters of the men who are hunting me. I want you to go to the one place Nerva will not expect you to be. He is searching city, the temples, the houses of people who might shelter you. He is not searching his own camp because no one would be foolish enough to seek safety there. The logic was insane. It was also, Livia realized, probably correct. Nerva would search everywhere except the one place that seemed most dangerous. And if she could reach Ko, if she could present the evidence at the meeting, if the officers believed her, how do I find the passage? Claudia pressed the bundle into her hands. Tertius will guide you. He knows the tunnels, knows the camp, knows how to avoid attention. Go now before the soldiers reach this section of the temple. What about you? I will delay them. I will claim that you were never here, that the search is misguided, that violating the sanctuary of Vesta will bring divine pun. Ishment. They will not believe me, but the argument will buy time. They might hurt you. They might, but the vessels have survived worse than Praetorian prefects, and we will survive this. Claudia's expression softened slightly. Go, Augusta, finish what you started, and if you succeed, remember what you promised. Livia nodded. There was no time for proper gratitude, no time for the acknowledgements. The moment deserved. She followed Ters toward the back of the chamber, toward a passage concealed behind a tapestry that opened onto darkness, and the faint smell of ancient sewers. Behind her she heard the soldiers reaching the corridor outside, heard Claudia's voice, raised in protest, invoking the gods and the laws and the traditions that were supposed to protect this place. Then, she was I. The tunnel, moving through darkness, carrying evidence that might destroy the man who hunted her, or might simply give him more reason to ensure that she never survived to use it. The tunnels beneath Rome were a world unto themselves. Livia had known intellectually that the city rested on a foundation of infrastructure, sewers, aqueducts, drainage channels, the hidden systems that made urban life possible. But knowing and experiencing were different things. Moving through the darkness with Turs as her guide, she felt as if she had descended into another reality, a shadow Rome that existed beneath the surface of the city she had known. The Cloaca Maxima was the largest of the sewers, a tunnel so vast that a person could walk upright through most of its length. It carried the waste of lion people toward the Tiber, a river of filth that had flowed since Rome's earliest days. Turs moved through it with the confidence of someone who had made this journey before, his feet finding solid ground even when Livia could see nothing, his voice guiding her around obstacles and hazards. "Keep your hand on the wall," he told her. "The footing is uneven, and the current can knock you down if you step into the central channel." She obeyed, feeling her way through the darkness, trying not to think about what she was walking through. The smell was overwhelming at first, then gradually faded as her senses adjusted. The sounds were strange echoes that made it impossible to judge distance, splashing that might have been rats or might have been other people using the tunnels for their own purpose. "How much farther?" she asked, after what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. "We're almost to the river junction. From there it's a short distance to the bank, and then overland to the camp. Overland in the open. There's no other way. The tunnels don't connect directly to the camp, but it's still dark and there are routes that avoid the main roads." She thought about what they were. Attempting. Traveling through the city at night, approaching the Praetorian camp, infiltrating a meeting of military officers who had every reason to distrust a woman appearing out of nowhere with claims about their commander. Any number of things could go wrong. Almost certainly something would. But the alternative was worse. Hiding in the sewers until dawn, emerging to find that Nerva had consolidated power, that Aurelia and the other women had been processed, that any hope of justice or survival had been destroyed. She kept moving. They emerged from the tunnels near the Tiber, where the Cloaca Maxima vomited its contents into the river. The night air felt impossibly fresh after the hours underground. The stars were visible overhead, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath them. Rs led her along the riverbank, avoiding the roads where patrols might be moving. The Praetorian camp was on the northeastern edge of the city, perhaps 2 miles from their current position. They moved quickly but carefully, using shadows and terrain for cover, freezing whenever sounds suggested other people moving nearby. "The camp will be guarded," Livia said as they approached. The walls were visible now, lit by torches at regular intervals. "How do we get inside?" "The same way I entered before, through the service gates, but we'll need to time it carefully. The gates open for supply deliveries at the half hour. We slip in with the delivery, separate once inside, find our way to the meeting location, and if we're caught, then we hope that Co has enough loyal men nearby to intervene before Nerva's people kill us." It was not reassuring, but it was honest. Livia appreciated honesty, even when it described terrible possibilities. They reached a position near the service gates and waited. The camp was quieter than Livia had expected. Most soldiers were apparently asleep or on duty elsewhere, perhaps participating in the citywide search for her. Only a skeleton crew seemed to be manning the camp itself. A cart appeared, loaded with supplies, driven by a slave who looked half asleep. Turs moved forward, approaching the driver with the casual confidence of someone who belonged. "Provisions for the officers' mess," he said. "The Virgo Maxima sends her compliments." The driver barely looked at him. "Add it to the list. Gate opens in a few minutes." They positioned themselves near the cart, close in. To seem associated with the delivery, but not so close that the driver would question them. When the gates opened, they moved with the cart, passing through the checkpoint with nothing more than a bored glance from the guards. They were inside the Praetorian camp. The meeting location, according to Tertius, was a building near the camp center, a hall used for officer gatherings, large enough to accommodate the group KO was assembling. but private enough to avoid attracting attention from Nerva's loyalists. They approached carefully, using the camp's shadows, avoiding the main pathways where they might encounter patrols. Livia kept her hood up, her face hidden, aware that her appearance might be known to some soldiers from her public functions as Empress. The hall came into view. Light spilled from its windows, suggesting that people were already gathering inside. Guards stood at the entrance, soldiers whose loyalties were presumably with KO, but whose reactions to an unexpected visitor could not be predicted. "I'll approach first," Ters said. "Explain who you are, why you're here. If they accept the explanation, I'll signal for you to come forward, and if they don't, run back. The way we came. I'll try to delay them." He moved toward the entrance. Livia watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding, her body tensed for flight. She saw Ters speak to the guards, saw their initial surprise, saw one of them disappear inside, presumably to consult with Ko about this unexpected development. A long pause. Then the guard returned, spoke to Ters, and gestured toward where Livia was hiding. She had been seen. The moment had arrived. She stepped forward, crossed the open ground to the entrance, and entered the building that would determine whether she lived or died. The hall contained perhaps 30 men, all of them officers, all of them looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. At the center of the group stood a man she presumed was Tribune Ko, middle-aged patrician features, the bearing of someone who expected to be obeyed. "You are Livia Marcella," he said. It was not a question. "I am. You have evidence against Prefect Nerva." "I do." She reached into the bundle Claudia had given her, removed the scrolls she had carried through the sewers and across the city. Financial records showing that he has been stealing from the Onative Treasury for at least 3 years, account discrepancies, transfer documents, everything needed to prove the theft. She placed the scrolls on a table at the hall's center. The officers leaned forward, curious despite their suspicion. "Why should we believe these documents are genuine?" one of them asked. "You are the widow of the man Nerva killed. You have obvious reasons to fabricate evidence against him. The documents bear treasury seals that only the prefect and the emperor have access to. The account numbers match the guard's official records. Examine them. Compare them to records you control, and you will see that they are authentic." "And why should we care about theft?" another officer asked. "Prefects have always taken more than their share. It is the nature of the position. Because this theft is not from the treasury in general. It is from the donative, specifically from the payments that are supposed to go to your men. The soldiers under your command have been receiving less than they are owed because Nerva has been redirecting their money to himself." This created a stir. The officers exchanged glances, calculations visible on their faces. The common soldier's loyalty, as the foundation of any military career. If those soldiers learned that their commander had been cheating them, no amount of patronage or political maneuvering would save him. "If this is true," Cato said slowly, "it changes everything. But verification will take time. Time that you do not have if Nerva discovers where you are. I'm not asking for time. I am asking for action. You have the evidence. You have officers here who can confirm its authenticity. Arrest Nerva now tonight, before he can destroy me or the other women he is holding. Arrest the Taurian prefect on the word of a fugitive widow. That is a bold demand. It is a necessary demand. Every hour you delay is an hour that Nerva uses to consolidate power, to eliminate witnesses, to prepare for the new emperor's arrival in a way that makes his position unassailable. Act now, and you have a chance to shape what comes next. Wait, and you will spend the rest of your careers serving a man who has stolen from your troops." Ko studied her for a long moment. She could see the calculation happening, the weighing of risks and rewards, the assessment of whether her evidence was genuine, the consideration of what action might mean for his career and his life. "There is something else," she said. "Something I did not include in the written message." "What?" "I have additional evidence. Documents proving that Nerva conspired with Sayers to assassinate my husband. Not circumstantial evidence, direct correspondence, planning documents. the entire conspiracy laid out in detail. The room went silent. If that evidence became public, she continued, it would destroy Size's legitimacy, as surely as the financial evidence destroys Nerva. The new emperor would spend years fighting accusations that he murdered his way to power. The guard's reputation would be tainted by association. Where is this evidence? Cato asked. Hidden, safe. I did not bring it because I do not want to use it, not unless I have no other choice. Sais is arriving regardless. He will be emperor regardless. I do not want war with him. I want accommodation. What kind of accommodation? A guarantee of my safety and independence. Permission to retire from public life to an estate of my choosing. The same consideration for the other women currently in Nerva's custody. My stepdaughter, my husband's concubines. Anyone else who has been victimized during this interregnum. You are bargaining for survival. I am bargaining for lives, not just my own, everyone's. Help me destroy Nerva, and I will ensure that the conspiracy evidence never surfaces. Sais arrives to find his enemy already removed, his path to power clear, his reign unstained by accusations of murder. That is worth something. The officers were murmuring among themselves now, absorbing the implications of what he was offering. The conspiracy evidence was leveraged that could reshape the entire political landscape. In the right hands, it was power that exceeded what any of them had expected to encounter. Ko raised a hand for silence. You are asking us to move against the prefect based on evidence we have not verified on behalf of a woman who has every reason to lie, with consequences that could destroy all of us if we are wrong. Yes. And in exchange you offer to suppress evidence that could threaten the new emperor, to protect us from the consequences of supporting the wrong side, to guarantee outcomes that you may not have the power to guarantee. Yes. Why should we trust any of this? Livia met his eyes directly. Because I am standing here in your camp, surrounded by armed men with nothing except my word and these documents. If I were lying, if this were some elaborate trap, what possible purpose would it serve? Nerva already controls the palace. He already has the other women. He does not need to trick you into revealing yourselves. He could simply wait for Sais to arrive and execute anyone he suspects of disloyalty. Then why are you here? Because I want to live. Because I want Aurelia and the others to live. Because the only way I can achieve those goals is to find someone willing to act against Nerva before he destroys us all. You are that someone, Tribune. You and the men in this room. The question is whether you have the courage to act. A long silence. Ko looked around the room, reading the faces of his officers, gauging their willingness to take the risk she was proposing. Then he spoke. Verify the documents. Compare them to the records we control. If they match, if the theft is real, we move against Nerva at dawn. Dawn may be too late. He has threatened to begin processing the Imperial women by then. Then we move at first light, as early as verification permits. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. You have taken an enormous risk coming here, Augusta. I hope for all our sakes that it proves justified. The next 3 hours were spent on verification. Officers with access to the guard's financial records compared them to the documents Livia had provided. The match was precise account numbers, dates, amounts, the specific details that would be impossible to fabricate without insider knowledge. The theft was real, documented beyond reasonable doubt. As the verification proceeded, Livia learned more about the situation in the palace. Messengers had been moving between the camp and the city, carrying reports that painted a picture of escalating danger. Nerva had intensified the search after the temple's violation failed to produce her. He had arrested several people suspected of helping her, including servants from the vast precinct. He had announced that processing would begin at dawn if she did not surrender. Most disturbing, the report specified what processing meant. The Imperial women would be given to the common soldiers as rewards for loyalty during the transition. Not to officers who might be expected to exercise some restraint, but to common soldiers who would exercise none. His was the interregnum tradition in its most brutal form. Women of the imperial household distributed like plunder, their bodies a demonstration that the old regime had fallen and the new one rewarded its supporters. Livia thought about Aurelia, thought about the concubines, women she had barely known had resented during her marriage, but who were now facing the same horror she had escaped. Thou. Ate about whether any of them would survive until dawn, until the verification was complete, until Co moved against Nerva. How much longer? She asked the officer, reviewing the documents. Another hour, perhaps. The records are extensive, and we must be thorough. Nerva, said Dawn. The sun rises in less than 2 hours. We are working as fast as we can. She wanted to scream at them, to demand tea. They move faster, to make them understand that every minute of delay might mean another woman's destruction. But she knew that pressure would not help, that verification required the time it required, that acting on incomplete certainty could destroy everything they were trying to accomplish. She waited. She watched the eastern sky for signs of light. She prayed to gods she was not sure she'd be. Leaved in for time that might not exist. Dawn was perhaps 30 minutes away when KO called the officers together. The documents are verified, he announced. Nerva has been stealing from the donatives for at least 3 years. The amounts are substantial, enough that every man in the guard has been shortchanged significantly. Then we move, one of the officers asked. We move, but we must be strategic. Nervo. Us still has loyalists in the camp and in the city. If we move openly, he might escape or rally support. We need to isolate him, arrest him before he can respond. How? A summons. We tell him that the officers have met and agreed to support his authority during the interregnum. We invite him to the hall to formalize this support. When he arrives, we arrest him. He'll be suspicious. Why would we summon him in the middle of the night? We tell him we've caught the fugitive Augusta, that she's here in custody, that we wanted him to be present when we delivered her. Co looked at Livia. You'll need to play a role. Bound, guarded, presented as a captive. When Nerva arrives, when he's inside and surrounded, we reveal the truth. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as a distraction. Nerva W. Ants you more than he wants anything else right now. If he believes you've been captured, he'll come. If he comes, we can arrest him without fighting. That would alert his loyalists. It was a reasonable plan, dangerous for her, but no more dangerous than everything else she had done tonight. And it might work. What about the women in the palace? She asked. Even if you arrest Nerva, his soldiers are still there, still guarding Aurelia and the others. Once Nerva is in custody, his authority evaporates. The soldiers in the palace will stand down when they learn their commander has been arrested. They have no loyalty to him personally, only to the position he held. You're certain of this? I am certain that soldiers follow authority, and authority flows from command. Without Nerva, there is no on. To give orders. Without orders, soldiers wait for direction. We provide that direction by assuming command ourselves. It made sense as far as military logic went, but military logic did not always account for what men might do in the absence of command, in the chaos of transition, in the moments before new authority was established. Let me send a message to the palace, she said. To the slaves, anyone who might help protect the women until your soldiers arrive. Let them know that rescue is coming. That they only need to delay a little longer. Cato considered this. A message might alert Nerva to what we're planning, not if it's sent through the servant network. The slaves have their own communications, their own loyalties. They can spread word without the soldiers knowing. You trust SL. Aves with information that could destroy us all. I trust people who have suffered under Nerva's authority to want his downfall. The palace slaves have been abused, overworked, threatened with sale and worse. They have every reason to help us, and no reason to help him. Keo exchanged glances with his officers. Finally, he nodded. Send your message, but make it quick. We summon Nerva within the hour. The message was sent through terrors who knew how to reach the slave networks that connected the camp to the city to the palace. Livia dictated quickly, aware that time was running out. Help is coming. Delay what you can. Protect who you can. Before the sun clears the walls, everything changes. It was vague by necessity. Detailed instructions could be intercepted and decoded, but the slaves would understand. They would know that someone was acting, that the interregnum might end differently than they had feared, that their cooperation might be rewarded when the new order emerged. Whether they could actually protect Aurelia and the others was uncertain, but the message gave them permission to try, and sometimes permission was enough. Nerva arrived within the hour. He came with a small escort. 4 soldiers, enough for protection, but not enough for combat. He had believed the summons, had believed that the officers were offering support, had believed above all that Livia had been captured and was waiting for him. He entered the hall with the confident stride of a man who expected to receive good news. He saw the officers assembled, saw Livia bound and guarded at the room's centre. Or everything he had expected to see. Then Co stepped forward. Lucius Cassius Nerva, prefect of the Praetorian Guard. You are under arrest for theft from the Guard's treasury, conspiracy to assassinate the Emperor, and crimes against the Imperial household. Surrender your weapons. Nerva's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to rage in the space of a heartbeat. He reached for his sword, but there were 30 men in the room and only 5 on his side. Before his blade was half drawn, he was surrounded, his escort disarmed, his authority collapsed. This is treason, he snarled. Sayes will have you all executed. Sayes will thank us for removing a commander who stole from his troops, Co replied. The evidence is comprehensive, Nerva. Account records, transfer documents, everything needed. To prove what you've done, the common soldiers will learn today what you took from them. I don't think you'll survive long enough to see Sayes arrive.
The threat was clear.
The Guard had its own justice for commanders who betrayed their troops. That justice was swift, brutal, and final. This is her doing. Nerva looked at Livia with hatred that was almost physical. She planned this. She manipulated. You all. She brought us evidence. What we do with that evidence is our choice. Co gestured to his men. Take him to the holding cells. Separate him from any loyalists and postguards who answer to us. They dragged Nerva away. His protests echoed through the hall until they faded into distance, leaving Livia alone with the officers who had taken an enormous risk on her word. It's done, Co said. Now we must move quickly. The palace, the city, the soldiers still loyal to him. Everything needs to be secured before the news spreads. Aurelia, Livia said, the women in the palace, please. Men are already on their way. We anticipated that you would ask. The sun rose over a Rome transformed. The Praetorian Guard, informed of their commander's theft through a carefully managed announcement, turned aga. Inst Nerva, with the fury that soldiers reserved for those who stole from them. He did not survive the morning. His death was not pleasant, but it was in its way just. The palace was secured by Co's loyalists, who found the Imperial women still alive. Aurelia had been held in Nerva's quarters, subjected to interrogation, but not yet to the worst treatment that had been planned. The concubines had been confined together, awaiting the distribution that the dawn deadline would have triggered. They were saved, by perhaps 30 minutes. By the margin between first light and sunrise, they were saved. Livia was reunited with her stepdaughter in the palace's main hall, surrounded by soldiers whose loyalties had shifted overnight. Aurelia was pale, shaken, bearing marks that suggested the interrogation had not been gentle. But she was alive. I didn't know if you would come, Aurelia said. I didn't know if anyone would. I was never going to leave you. Livia held her stepdaughter, feeling the girl's trembling slowly subside. I made promises I couldn't keep and sacrifices I couldn't avoid, but I was never going to leave you. Sayes arrived 3 days later to find a city at peace and a succession ready accomplished. He was presented with Nerva's crimes and Cato's loyalty. He was informed that the Guard had acted to preserve order and to protect the new emperor's legitimacy. He was offered the support of officers who asked only that he confirm their positions and reward their service. He accepted. He had no choice. The alternative was fighting a Guard that already controlled the city, which would have been costly and uncertain. Better to embrace allies who had made his path easier, whatever their motivations. Livia was granted her request. Retirement to an estate in the provinces, with income sufficient for comfortable independence. Aurelia accompanied her, choosing family over the political marriages that might have restored her position. The concubines were given smaller provisions, enough to establish modest households far from the palace they had served. The conspiracy evidence, the documents proving Sayes's complicity in her husband's murder remained with Livia, hidden but not destroyed. insurance against future threats, leverage that the new emperor knew existed, even if he never saw it. They reached an understanding. Sace and Livia, he would not pursue her, she would not expose him. Both would live with the knowledge of what the other possessed. The mutual deterrence that maintained stability when trust was impossible. It was not justice. Her husband's murder went unpunished. His killer now wearing the purple that should have been worn by someone who earned it legitimately. But it was survival. It was protection for Aurelia and the others. It was the best outcome, available from a situation that had offered nothing but terrible options. Livia lived for another 23 years on her provincial estate. She watched from a distance, as Sace consolidated power, as the empire's politics continued their eternal churning, as new emperors rose and fell in the patterns that made Roman history so repetitive. She received occasional visitors, old allies, former servants, people, who remembered what she had done during the interregnum and wanted to acknowledge it. She wrote her account of those 72 hours, not for publication, not during her lifetime, but for the record, a document that preserved what had actually happened when her husband died and the guard seized control of the palace. The document was copied by a secretary and preserved in a private archive where it survived the centuries that destroyed so much else from that era. This is how we know what the Praetorian Guard did to the emperor's wife when he died, not from official histories which recorded only that the succession proceeded smoothly and the widow retired from public life, but from Livia's own testimony written in the years after her escape, preserved by the accident of archival survival. She desca. I bed the interregnum tradition in terms that the historians avoided. She documented nervous threats, the conditions in the palace, the processing that had been planned for the imperial women. She explained what happened when emperors died, not the political transitions that official accounts recorded, but the human reality of women suddenly rendered vulnerable to men who had been restrained only by imperial authority. She described what she had done to survive, the bargains, the manipulations, the calculated use of information as a weapon. She did not present herself as a hero. She had made compromises that heroes would have refused, had traded principles for survival in ways that still troubled her years later. But she had lived, and living had permitted her to protect others. That was it had to be enough. Remember Livia Marcella. Remember the empress who knelt in her husband's blood, who fled through sewers and tunnels, who infiltrated the camp of the men who hunted her, who presented evidence that destroyed a prefect and saved the women he intended to destroy. Remember that her survival required 72 hours of constant danger, constant calculation, constant willingness to risk everything for outcomes she could not guarantee. Remember that she succeeded not through heroic combat, but through intelligence, through bargaining, through the ruthless deployment of information against men who had swords and armies. Remember the interregnum tradition. Remember that Roman history's orderly successions concealed horrors that the historians chose not to record. Remember that imperial women during these transitions faced dangers that their male relatives were spared, not death, which might have been preferable, but processing into systems of distribution and use that reduced them from persons to property. Remember that this was Rome's darkest secret, not the gladiatorial games, not the crucifixions, not the spectacular cruelties that everyone knew about, but the quiet roar of what happened behind palace walls when emperors died. The systematic availability of elite women to soldiers who had been restrained only by authority that no longer existed. Remember Aurelia, who survived by 30 minutes, who lived because a message reached slaves, who delayed what they could, who was saved by a margin so narrow that it barely counted as survival at all. Remember Nerva, who died the way commanders, who steal from their troops die, whose end was brutal, but whose crimes were worse. Remember Co, who took an enormous risk on the word of a fugitive widow, who moved against his commander based on evidence that might have been fabricated, who gambled his career and his life on the calculation that justice was worth pursuing. Remember that survival in impossible situations requires both courage and calculation. That the intelligent response to overwhelming force is not to fight directly, but to find leverage, to identify weaknesses, to turn the system's complexity against itself. That women throughout history have survived by methods that history rarely records because historians rarely asked what happened to the women. Remember what the Praetorian Guard R&D did to the emperor's wife when he died. Remember that she survived. Remember that her survival saved others. Remember that this is what Roman successions actually looked like beneath the official accounts of smooth transitions and orderly transfers of power. Remember Livia Marcella. Remember, subscribe if you want more hidden histories revealed. Comment below telling me where you are watching. Share this video with anyone who thinks they understand Roman history from the stories of emperors and legions. Because the emperors are only part of the story. The legions are only part of the story. The real story, the one the historians preferred not to tell, is what happened to the women when the men who protected them were gone.